In order for deep visibility to be set up correctly to do the job you need it to do, we have to make a couple of decisions at the beginning. So essentially, this is preparation for the use of deep visibility. Now, deep visibility doesn't really come up in the preparation area. We're actually setting up deep visibility itself. So deep visibility does gather a great deal of information about our endpoints. It's the entire point of the system. Much of that data, some of it, or some or much, depending on how you want to look at it, could be considered PII, or personally identifiable information. And so we need to be careful about the data that we gather. First, we have to decide which data is important, because not everything that we can gather is necessarily as useful as everything else. We'll talk about some examples of that when we look at all of the information and the choices we can make. Lastly, we need to obey the law. Consult either HR or legal, because if you gather information outside of what you're permitted to gather, you can get yourself and your organization into trouble. You might need to be concerned about national lines, so they might not be able to transmit this data across borders. There are other things that you need to make sure that you are keeping track of. So like I say here, consult either HR or legal to make sure that you are not stepping outside of the bounds. With that, let's jump into the software and take a look at some of the policy settings that we can have for deep visibility. The policy settings for deep visibility do live with the other policy settings that are available for us. And those all live under Sentinels and then policy. If you scroll down, you'll get to the deep visibility section. I'm going to click on change policy just to light this all up for everybody. So as you can see here, I can set the policy differently for every area inside the hierarchy, as we've discussed in some of the administrative classes, which means that we can actually set the deep visibility functionality differently for different areas of our network. This can be important if you have different areas of your network in different countries, or you have it in different departments, and you want to gather different information for those different areas. You can turn it all on and all off by simply unchecking the deep visibility box. And then here is a listing of various groupings of data that can be either turned on or turned off. In most cases, the more you can have turned on, the better off you'll be, because you'll actually have more information from which to gather data about what's going on your network. However, you may need to figure out if this stuff is too personal or it's information you don't want to have. For example, if you are running some sort of IR situation for a client, you may or may not want to know where they go on the internet all the time. That might not be your business. So you could then turn off the URL information and possibly some of the process information so that you don't see all that information. However, in most businesses, since there is a lack of the right to privacy inside a business, then you can leave all of this on. It is possible, of course, to see pretty much where everybody goes and what they do on their computer, going through and looking at the deep visibility information. Barring legal issues, the only other thing that you might want to consider is the DLL module load area. We'll talk a little bit about some DLL module loads in another video, but the long and the short of it here is the DLL module load does give you an event each time any piece of software loads a DLL file, which in Windows is very often. So often, in fact, that you actually will see a noticeable increase in traffic from your endpoints out to the centralized servers with this option turned on. I have it turned on here because these are test machines and there really isn't a whole lot of information going out to the console as it is. But if you do have 40 or 50 or more thousand machines, you will see a noticeable increase in traffic. The data that you gather with the DLL module load is useful, but not as useful as some of the others that are here. DLL module loader does allow you to see if you are loading modules from oddball locations. Say, for example, an attacker puts a DLL in a temp folder in somebody's account and then runs from there. And they do that, of course, because they have permissions to that account where they would not have permissions to put it into the normal System32 folder that they would go in regularly. So you can search through and find DLLs that are either oddly named or oddly placed to get a clue as to whether or not this system may have been compromised. However, beyond that, there's not a whole lot of other telling information about the DLLs, and some people find it to be more trouble than it's worth, and so they do turn this off. Data masking is generally off by default. This may be a good compromise for those areas where you need to be careful about who can see this data. For example, if I'm in the IR field and I am investigating some CEO's machine, then I could see things like a Word document and the name of that Word document and things that may have changed. If that Word document is called, "This company will be going out of business next week," then there may be some data leakage that we do not wish to have the IT staff able to have access to. So you can turn on data masking, and you can prevent that sort of information by blocking the actual names of certain files. We'll still get the information that says a Word file exists and that it was modified and things of that nature, but we would not be able to understand or read the file name. Lastly, here we have the ability to install the Deep Visibility browser extensions. As I mentioned in a previous video, especially the URL information is not gathered by the agent itself. It's actually gathered by Deep Visibility browser extensions that are installed into the browsers on the endpoints. Normally, when you install the agent, those browser extensions can be installed automatically. However, if you have Google Workspace, then the browser extensions are controlled through the Google interface. And you can still install them, but you must do it separately, or else the Google Workspace does have an issue with it. I've also seen where you can have Microsoft group policy that disables the ability for the Deep Visibility browser extensions to be installed. And you can also get around that by installing them through group policy if you so choose. With that, be sure to set up Deep Visibility within the laws and the regulations of your area. And the more information you can gather, the better off you are. See you in the next video.